And we appreciate that you're all here. What is this, the third or fourth meeting? Fifth. Gosh, I'm a week off. All right, I knew I was close. Today, the topic that the group is bringing to you are practices in educational settings that promote learning. This is a title that's been played with a whole lot. The original concept was something along the lines of how do you manage different learning environments with your learners. You guys probably work in very different places. Some people do classroom teaching, some people do clinical teaching, some people do classroom and sim centers, the skills center, all those different settings that people learn in. And there are techniques that I know the panel today are expert on and questions that they have about how to participate in those particular kinds of settings that they're bringing to you. So the title's changed a little bit, but the idea is how do you work in all this multiplicity of the situations that people actually learn in. Oh, come on. That's not working just like we talked about. We'll do it this way. Your panel today, and I'm not going to introduce them other than to tell you their names. They come from a variety of environments around campus. The list over here on the side versus saying you're a member of what college and all that kind of stuff is really the kind of setting that they primarily work in, primarily teach in. So Mari Davidson, Dr. Can I just use your names and not call you all doctors? You're all doctors. Mari Davidson, Alan Diekman, Mary Cantrell, Mike Andrews, and Toby Vansel, if he makes it from clinic. Okay, he's running really tight today. We really have three fairly brief objectives, primarily to look at adult learning theories and how they can be used to promote learning in all these different kinds of settings, to talk about practices that promote learning in different kinds of settings, and then to look at, we have it on there twice, fine, discuss some of those practices. So the group is going to use a framework today where we're going to have 10-minute talks by each of the presenters. We're going to ask you to hold your questions, and then I'm supposed to be the timekeeper and keep them down to their 10 minutes. We're taking bets on who's going to have the 1-minute finger, the 2-minute finger, the 5-minute finger, and keep them, try to close to that. So we'll spend about the first hour of the time together today in a more of a presentation mode, and then we'll spend the last half hour or so, however it works out, in more of a panel discussion mode where you'll have the opportunity to get different opinions from different people that represent different kinds of settings. So that's the plan, straightforward, okay? And I think we're in order, correct? So with that, I will bring Mari up. I'll get you right there, right? That's you, right? I'll get in your way.
So I'm Mari Davidson, as he said, and I'm coming to you from the Basic Science Research Laboratory Center. And so that's what I'm going to base my discussion on. So when you look at this poster that describes some attributes of a scientist, I hope you notice that all these words here are action verbs. And that's why we feel that a laboratory is really an important learning environment for a student to become a scientist. That said, every laboratory environment is unique. It's to borrow a phrase from Dr. Diekman, a laboratory is the ultimate in the active learning experience. Everything the student does is going to be hands-on learning, and it's going to be learning by trial and error. So that makes each student's experience very unique. Another thing that makes the student's experience unique is the student-mentor relationship. This relationship is really very important, and we feel it's the keystone to a positive learning experience. And this is why we encourage students to actually go out, talk to potential mentors, talk to other folks who are in the laboratory, even if they can do a short rotation in that laboratory to see what is the mentor's teaching style. Are they very hands-on? Are they easily accessible? Are they do they welcome questions? Or are they more likely to give the student a protocol and say, you go to it, you see what you can do. Some students really like that because they want to be the one figuring out all the steps. What's key is to match up the student's learning style with the mentor's teaching style. And when that happens, it's, as some say, a great marriage. So something that's really common in all laboratory experiences is that the student needs to go in and learn how to use very specific equipment in order to carry out their experiments. And the other thing is that they need to be able to accurately record their experiments, to describe the steps that they took to carry out that experiment, and also to accurately and completely record the data. If they do not record how they did the experiment as well as their data, then in the end it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to analyze the results that they obtained. And so in the laboratory setting, we are hoping that they learn how to translate the theory they're learning in their didactic courses into practice in the laboratory setting. And ultimately then, they will be able to apply these concepts to new situations. And so ultimately, it's the mentor's role to help the student learn how to exercise curiosity and creativity, some of those action verbs you saw on the first chart, to design a procedure to test a hypothesis. And in the process of testing that hypothesis, there's going to be lots of troubleshooting. That troubleshooting may occur with the student interacting with his mentor, asking questions. Also, it allows the students then to practice what we call collaborative problem solving with others in the lab and also other students that are around them. And through this problem solving, they then grow in their strengths of becoming a scientist. In addition, while you may not consider this the lab per se, members of a laboratory carry out group meetings, lab meetings, and here the students are able to present their data, explain their experimental protocols, their thoughts in designing the experiment, and how they analyze that experiment. It helps them in their developing their experimental and data analysis skills, but also importantly, it helps them in their communication skills. Because ultimately, the student must be able to communicate how they performed the experiment and the results they obtained to the scientific community as a whole. And so they are going to do this through learning how to write papers for publication, as well as attending scientific meetings and presenting their work. Here we have Deepa, who presented her histone modification experiments in a national meeting where she won first place for that work. And so we encourage our students to go out into the scientific community and present that work. So hopefully they can put all these skills together, learning how to design an experiment, carry it out, analyze the results, and ultimately communicate those results to the scientific community as a whole. And together that allows them to become this scientist who can carry out all these different activities. I told you I'd be fast.
Let's see.
So you can give me my Bible.
Oh, that'll be up for grabs here.
I'm Alan Diekman, and I'm going to be telling you about use of the Active Learning Center to promote learning. This is a facility that is on the first floor of the library. This is a fairly unique classroom on our campus. As far as I know, it's the only one like it. This is a room not of desks, but of 30 tables where students sit around them. I'm going to show you a blueprint of the classroom in a moment, but I want you to notice that when you look at this picture, it looks chaotic. Okay, the students are all faced in different directions. That's very the hallmark of some of the active learning sessions that are occurring in this room. Also, there are no blackboards, no whiteboards. What we have are flat screen monitors, 8 of them around the periphery of the room. My talk is going to be a little bit different than Mari's. I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to use this room effectively for the sessions that you have in it. I'm not going to talk specifically about what kind of sessions you have because there are too many of them for a 10-minute talk. So for example, you could have team-based learning, you could have POGIL, you could have case discussions, case-based discussions. So we don't have time to talk about each and every type of modality. However, what they all have in common is use of small groups, and that is what this room is designed for. Use of small groups in a large group format. So there are 30 of these tables in the room. You'll see they're fairly small. That's very intentional because in the context of a large room, you want 6 people to have a fairly intimate conversation. They need to hear each other. It was a little ridiculous when we picked these tables. A bunch of professors sitting around a bunch of different tables on the first floor of the library. I think Mary was there for that.
I do.
Yeah. So they want to be able to have a conversation. All right. So what I'm going to show now is a diagram of the room. There are 30 tables in what used to be called the fishbowl on the first floor of the library. They are scattered throughout the room. Each has 6 seats at it. And what you are going to hear me say this throughout this 10 minutes. The Active Learning Center, the ALC, is not a lecture hall. It is very difficult to give a lecture in this room. However, people still try. Why is it difficult to give a lecture in this room? Here's the podium. The podium is in the center of the room. So you, as a faculty member, are here. You are in the center of the room. You are not at the front of the room. Not everyone is looking at you. In fact, a good portion of the class is going to have their back towards you because they're looking at the monitors, which are located around the outer walls of the room. Every table is wired. We have wireless microphones to facilitate the discussion. Okay? So again, the ALC is not a lecture hall. We don't have another facility like this on campus, but there is another analogous facility like this in town. Here we have a room with a bunch of tables surrounding a space in the middle. Does anyone recognize what this is? It is Murray's Dinner Playhouse. Okay? And in fact, we could move our sessions from the Active Learning Center to Murray's Dinner Playhouse and have it work because the setup is the same. If you've ever heard an actor or a director talk in theater, what they'll say is they are not simply on a stage presenting something to an audience. They are interacting with the audience, and that's very important for what we're trying to do in this space. So, in a way, the Active Learning Studio is theater in the round, which is really what it is. Okay, I'm going to give you some tips now on how to use this room effectively. I'm not going to talk about specific modalities, but notice that these students sit around in small groups. There are actually papers and papers written on how you select your small group. But I'm going to give you a few tips about that. Do not allow the small groups to self-select. It will become middle school selecting teammates for dodgeball. Okay, you don't want that happening. Okay, make the process transparent. Tell the students how you are selecting those small groups. Okay, do not stratify the students by GPA. That is our first knee-jerk reaction. We want to put the well performers with the poor performers to help each other. Bad idea. Why? You've told them how you're doing it because the process is transparent. They're all going to sit around the table thinking, am I the dumb one? And that's going to impede the learning process. Trust me, it is true. The other thing is, random selection works great as long as you tell them it's random. But do try to avoid all male or all female groups. There is data that shows all male and all female groups do not interact well with each other. Also, avoid placing a married couple in the same group. That also can change the dynamic of the small group in various ways. Also, do not grant requests to change groups unless absolutely necessary. You want people to learn to work in a team, right? In the workplace, you don't really get to pick who's on your team. So they have to learn how to deal with that. Okay, now a couple of slides on how do you keep the discussion focused in this room. It is a problem, okay? Trust me, you are not going to have any trouble getting the students to talk to each other in their small groups. You will have trouble getting them to be quiet when it's time to listen, okay? And there are some strategies in terms of how to do that. First of all, use the wireless mic and walk around the room during the large group discussion, if you're having a large group discussion. So earlier I had said, you're going to be here, okay? That's actually a misnomer. Where are you going to be during this session? You're going to be here. You are going to be walking around the room, wear comfortable shoes. If you stay at the podium during the entire time, you're doing it wrong, okay? Also, and this is counterintuitive, when you are facilitating a large group discussion and a student is talking at table 1, where should you be? You should be over here. Human nature is to walk towards the person that you're having a conversation with. You don't want to do that here. You're having a conversation with the entire class. If student at table 1 is talking and you walk over to table 1, both of your voice levels will drop. The rest of the room will perceive that you're having a private conversation and they will start talking to each other. So I've heard people say they get quite a workout when they teach in this room, because as soon as a student on this side of the room starts talking, you have to book it to this side of the room, okay? It is to prevent side conversations from occurring, and it subtly encourages everyone to raise their voice so everyone can hear. But again, it's counterintuitive to human nature. All right, a couple of other points. Keep it moving. You don't want the students getting bored, or you're going to lose them and they're going to start talking, and it will be very distracting. If problems arise, like a problem with a quiz question, take care of it then and there. Make it a non-issue in some way so that the students don't sit there and fret and complain and worry. You don't want to impede the learning. You want to take care of it right away and move on. Also, make it clear from the start that unprofessional behavior will not be tolerated. Put it in your syllabus. Many of these sessions are not required in terms of getting graded. However, you can make it required for attendance being mandatory with professionalism points in some other ways that you can assign some sort of score to their attendance. Because trust me, there can be problems getting the students to remain quiet, just like it can be problems getting faculty to remain quiet. All right, manage your faculty, okay? One of the problems we have with this facility is faculty who do not understand it is not a lecture hall. We've had a number of faculty who will show up with a thumb drive of 100 slides. No, they are not going to get to lecture in this room. They're there to provide expert feedback if it's necessary. They're not there to give a lecture. So what do you need to do? You need to provide adequate training to your faculty before the session, okay? They need to know what the modality is going to be, and also the use of the ALC. So you also have to familiarize yourself with the technology, them and you. This room has much more technology in it than a typical lecture hall. The other thing that you have to do in this is also counterintuitive. You need to correct your faculty member during the session. Typically, if a faculty member does something that you need to correct and you notice it, you're going to wait until after the lecture is over, right? You can't do that in this session. Possibly a 3-hour session, it's going to take too long. I mean, you could lose students because they keep making the same mistake. You want to gently correct them while there's some downtime privately. And so I stand behind my faculty. And if they're doing something wrong during one of those small group discussions, I attempt to fix it right then and there. So to summarize, here's some quick tips on how to use the Active Learning Center. First, again, it's not a lecture hall. Don't treat it as a lecture hall. Don't give a lecture. You will not be able to have the students pay sufficient attention. Choose your small groups appropriately. Give it some thought. There is lots of data out there on how to do that appropriately. Manage the large group discussions to avoid side conversations. You don't want to lose the students. You don't want them surfing the internet. You don't want them on their cell phones. You want them paying attention, and there are strategies on how to do that. One of the ways is keep it moving. kiss of death is for the students to become bored, which is very easy in the Active Learning Center, also because with that chaos, they can be easily distracted. Because it's not the front forward kind of lecture hall setup that we're used to. Make sure your faculty are on board. They need to buy into the modality that you're using, and they have to, again, understand that it's not a lecture hall, which is usually the biggest problem we have with faculty who have not taught in the Active Learning Center before. And lastly, have fun, because many of these modalities that we use actually are really fun. And you can interact with students in a very different way than you're used to, than when you're giving a typical lecture. And I will stop there.
I really wish I would have had this talk. I did a lecture in the ALC because I did all the wrong things. Thank you, I appreciate that. I want to do more. My name is Mary Cantrell, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about working in a clinical skills center and a center for simulation education where I'm at. And really what I want to talk to you about is the difference between traditional learning in a lecture and being in an active center or an active simulated environment, which is where we are with the Centers for Simulation Education. And I want to look at applying shared inquiry to any kind of simulated education. So, you know, we're used to things like the sage on the sage on the stage, but I like this concept of the guide on the side, which is really what active learning is about. It's instead of being up in front like we're all used to, it's more of a person that's guiding you along a path because they've already have the information from a lecture, from a handout, from something. So you as a faculty member, as a professional, are guiding them through an actual activity and simulation. It should feel very real. So everything I learned about simulation, I really learned early on from a program called the Great Books Foundation. It was founded by Robert Hutchins and Mortimer Adler, who was a philosopher actually. And he taught this way at the University of Chicago. And in 1947, he started this thing called the Great Books Foundation. Anybody heard of Great Books? Yeah, great. So you have. So I was actually trained as a leader when my daughter was in the 3rd grade. And what I learned there was fascinating to me because I had a small child. I'd been rearing her and saying, good job, good job. But in this teaching, it was teaching literature to K through 12 was their goal, and have them be able to talk about it in a way that they could actually dissect literature. They could talk about it critically, and they can learn about it critically. So the interesting thing, this is the Great Books Foundation mission, and I pulled out and highlighted the words that really affect simulation education as well. Things like thinkers, and that it's an inquiry-based process. We want our learners to reflect. We want them to be well-informed, especially for patient safety, and to really inspire people, and also be able to gain knowledge and reflect and be engaged. How many of you all have actually been in a simulation before or worked with simulation? Many of you. Yeah, it's really an engaging process. So here's a reading group in Great Books, and they read first. You read the story first, and then you discuss it. And it's this discussion that is the activity. Same thing happens with simulation. There's an activity, a simulation case, whether it's in a clinic setting or in a simulation center, and then there is this discussion, and that is where the learning happens. This is the concept of shared inquiry. I want to share it with you because I think it's so valuable. No matter if you're teaching in a lab, and we were just talking about this earlier, whether you're teaching in a lab or whether you're in a simulation or wherever you are. And so it's a method of learning. So these are the principles of shared inquiry. It's a method of learning. It enables people to explore the ideas, meanings, and information in everything they read, or in our situation, everything they do. And then the shared inquiry promotes an intellectual, stimulating conversation. And that's what you do as a facilitator. You have this conversation with with your group or a discussion. And then it's very active. It's active, you can articulate questions about ideas and listen to the response. You can respond to them in the moment as a faculty member. You can respond right then and there. So this is the key though. Shared inquiry is about a learner, asking the learners skilled questions. Asking the learners skilled questions. As a grade books leader, and I was trained at the Little Rock Library, you were trained only to ask questions. So I would get with this group of third graders and I would say, so we read Hansel and Gretel today, and it said in the story that they were a good boy and girl. Why do you think they went off the path? Oh, it started. They all had an idea after they read this why Hansel and Gretel had gone off the path into the, and got lost. I naturally want to say, well, that's a great idea, or good job, what a great question. No. The minute you did that, everybody else in the group would shut down. Oh, I had an idea, but it wasn't as good as hers, so I'm not going to say anything. So it was a very valuable lesson for me, and it became a valuable lesson even though I had one child. Just being with children and asking questions only. So I'm very fascinated by this. Mortimer Adler said, in the case of good books, and I say this about all cases of simulation, the point is not to see how many you can get through, but how many can get through to you. How many of them hit you where you can learn, where the learning happens. In simulation, we have actually 4 modalities, and Mike is actually going to talk a little bit more about case-based simulation team training in the Simulation Center. We have a center upstairs, which is a clinic, more of an outpatient clinic, which is really focusing on doctor-patient or nurse-patient, healthcare, learner, and patient relationships. So what you're going to see up there is one patient at a time, usually, sometimes it's in pairs, and one healthcare worker who's going to interview them, do a physical exam on them, and we often ask questions afterwards about what their experience was like. How did that feel? What was that like for you? So we do ask questions afterwards because it stimulates what they've learned in a lecture, where they have been. And then we have simulation cases done in an inpatient setting, like the Simulation Center. Mike will tell you more about that. We also have partial task trainers that we use with students and learners, and then hybrid cases, which are both. So it might be a simulator, but the woman on the side of the simulator is playing the wife. Or it might be a person with something on their arm and someone's trying to give them a shot, so it's what a patient would really feel like if you were trying to do a TB skin test or trying to do something as a procedure to a real patient. Simulation process is really heavy on the front end. It takes a lot of time in the beginning, but with writing objectives, making sure that you have cases that work and that cases that are, we actually want cases that come from real life experiences, as well as checklists and kind of logistics, how it's going to work, along with using our software, which is called Learning Space. So this can all be, as in a laboratory, you can gather data through our Learning Space software. Finally, there are no lectures in simulation. It's not a place for lectures. I see we're all steering way far away from that. It's very active. There is, really the luxury that we have at UAMS is it's fully staffed. So you don't have to recreate the wheel, or I don't have to teach Dr. Crossland how to do it and Dr. Diekman how to run the mannequin. They can just have what they need and come in, and our staff is the one who runs mannequins and who helps with software and those kinds of things. We also are a great faculty development resource for you all in that we can develop people to become good people at shared inquiry or asking questions or debriefing. And then it has a high learner satisfaction. We often have students tell us that it's the scariest place that they've ever been, but they love doing it. There's something about it that they really love. So this is contact information, and I'll wait with questions.
think we owe everybody a big round of applause. They're standing their time up and telling me to shut up yet.
But wait, there's more. Dr. Vance was
Hopefully Dr. Vance will.
What standardization?
simulated patients.
So this lecture, this talk transitions nicely from Mary's. I'm going to focus my discussion on the Simulation Center, which many of you have been there. It's the former emergency department. We're very fortunate to have this facility. It's nice that people that used to work in the emergency department in some capacity come there. We're really proud that it's a beautiful center, and we're using that space in such a productive way. We have people that go off. I've heard people from our faculty that come back from Stanford with a beautiful building and a dean of simulation, and they love our simulation center. We really have a nice facility. We're really fortunate. So what is simulation? You'll notice this simulation is not in the simulation center. It's out on our campus. And simulation, we interpret it very broadly here. It's a method that duplicates conditions likely to be encountered in real life. This particular simulation was, the learners were our paramedic students, and they had a combination of patients. They had simulated patients or standardized patients who were walking wounded. They had this patient, one of our computerized mannequins, that was very, very sick and needed to be they needed to treat. Their first objective was to triage the patients effectively, zero in on this patient, and they literally put him in we programmed the physiology, the vital signs, put him in the ambulance, and brought him to what used to be the emergency department, into what used to be the former ambulance, the entrance for the emergency department team, and handed off to nurses. So the objectives were triage, assessment and management of the patient, and then finally communication with the nursing staff and handing off the patient. So a nice combination of objectives. And we do a wide range of simulations. We did a simulation recently with audiology, where we had actually there were instructors from the deaf school who were simulating deaf parents whose child could hear, and they were upset about that. The audiology students had to communicate with them. So the first important thing in simulation is to think about the objectives, the learning objectives. And what we really encourage in simulation is to look at the top level of objectives. This is Bloom's taxonomy of objectives. And at the base of the pyramid, knowledge and comprehension, we actually encourage faculty to do activities, be it presentations, readings, online material, so students have some knowledge and comprehension of the information before they come to the simulation center. They have tools. They can now progress up the ladder, and we can use verbs like they can apply, they can analyze, they can synthesize things, put things together. They can actually be thinking about systems management, the things that happen in the hospital from a system standpoint, and then even evaluation. They can evaluate the team's performance or their individual performance in a debrief. This is really, I think, the bottom line on why simulation works. It's deliberate practice. In simulation, the faculty have the ability to have very focused objectives. And this is really important. We know from research that learning it really occurs nicely when we have objectives that are not only in the cognitive realm, but in the affective realm and the psychomotor realm. And students get to do it all at once in the same scenario. So they get to put it all, to apply all these things in context, in a somewhat realistic context. And then there's assessment. The faculty will be observing and will be assessing the learners. And then finally, the faculty are able to give them direct feedback. And so this is very different from the traditional apprenticeship. In fact, a systematic review by McGehee looked at the traditional learning of traditional apprenticeships versus simulation. And there aren't very many studies, but the data is very encouraging for the potential for simulation. One study in particular was interesting to me. It was on cardiology, students on cardiology rotations. And students were randomized to a traditional cardiology apprenticeship or simulation where they had focused objectives in cardiology and went through this entire process. And students in simulation developed, at the end of it, they measured their competencies in cardiology. They developed double the number of competencies in half the time. I do want to share with you, for those that haven't been in the simulation, a 20-second video, and it's actually our neonatal team. They do simulations monthly. They're a great group because they wouldn't think of doing anything but interprofessional simulations. They always have nurses, they always have respiratory therapists, and at the head of the bed you'll see in this simulation that I'm about to show you, it's just 20 seconds of a simulation. But I think you'll look for how much happens in 20 seconds of the simulation. But in this simulation, the leader is the resident. It's a brand new resident at the head of the bed with experienced nurses and experienced respiratory therapists. And look for these, think about these things, the focused objectives in developing this simulation, and cognitive, affective, psychomotor skills you might debrief on, and then the feedback one might get in a debriefing afterwards.
Are we trying? I don't know. Not trying. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Is he breathing? Not breathing, not crying. I'm not feeling a heart rate. You said heart rate. Pulse on. Maybe I think her heart rate.
Heart rate's at 37.
So,
Are we trying?
as you can imagine, the objectives for this simulation were very much related to teamwork, leadership, communication, also following the protocol for a newborn delivery. And so I think you can see those things at play in that brief video. So this is really interesting to me, and if you read about the relationship of emotion and learning, emotion during experience. Sometimes our most vivid memories are those things where we had a great deal of emotion. In fact, when you think about our emotional response, sometimes occurs much faster than our cognitive thought sometimes. So emotions are thought to be very important in learning. Right now, you guys look like, if we look at 4 quadrants of emotional states, I'm going to just guess based on your appearance that you're in this quadrant right here, the right lower quadrant. You look relaxed, you look pretty calm. I'm going to speculate that you probably are pretty content. You have your flip-flops on and your feet propped up. Look pretty content to me. This is the traditional classroom setting. It's somewhat of a passive, deactivated emotional state, if you will. This is where we really aim for in simulation, and that is more of an excited, alert, engaged state of emotion, and it changes the whole dynamic in terms of learning and the thought process. One of the things that does occur, and this does happen in the simulation center, and it actually is associated with learning, is we can get over into the unpleasant side sometimes. Sometimes learners become frustrated, they get stressed out, and they're upset. They come into the debriefing, they're visibly upset. And we have to, as a debriefer, learn to let them vent that emotion so we can get into the analysis of their performance in a very candid way. So this is a challenge for educators in simulation. And we don't want to keep them in this left upper quadrant too long. We like to bring them over. As Mary said, they said that was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I loved it. So we like to bring them back over to the right upper quadrant if we can. And so this is my main message today. If you don't remember anything else I said and you're interested in simulation, and this I think carries over way beyond simulation, and that's the importance of psychological safety and learning. And this is particularly true in simulation because people are vulnerable. Their peers are watching them, their faculty are watching them, and this often doesn't occur in other settings. And so this is actually a graph put forward by Edmondson in the Harvard Business publication, and she studied successful businesses, organizations, and she found that she could divide them into 4 different learning styles. And on the x-axis, we have accountability for demanding goals. In other words, challenge. And in simulation, we like to challenge learners. It's a good place to do that. And so we want to move to the right. We want to move out of the apathy zone where it's not challenging to the learners. But if we don't provide psychological safety, which is on the y-axis or the vertical axis, then we can be in that right lower quadrant, the anxiety zone. And what she found was that there were a lot of organizations that did okay for a while there, but over time the employees didn't take any risk. They were afraid of making a mistake. So they were trying nothing new. They were always hammered whenever they made a mistake. So they had a lot of anxiety. Since that time it's been brought over into education. A lot of people are looking at this model in education. So what we shoot for is to, from the time learners, we first meet them when they walk in the door, it's a safe, friendly environment, and we are going to challenge them. We're going to try to get them in that learning zone where they can not be hung up on failing, if you will, but more importantly, think about performance improvement in a way that they can help patients better. So how do you do that? Well, that's a challenge. You have to be trustworthy. They have to trust you to be able to have candid conversation about their performance. So to do that, you have to be transparent. And we hear this from some learners. I wish the faculty would admit when they don't know the answer, rather than trying to fake it. Be very transparent, very vulnerable with the learners, and they really appreciate that. Very authentic, very clear that you're there to help them. So along with the idea of a psychologically safe learning environment, this is a rule we have in the Simulation Center. In fact, there's a Simulation Center in Magnolia, of all places, where she saw this slide when she came to our center, and she posted a big poster of this in her Simulation Center in Southern Arkansas.
In Magnolia, yeah.
In Magnolia. So what happens in the Simulation Center stays in the Simulation Center. So students don't get graded. It's not part of their evaluation. All the faculty that have come here have bought into that. And it works because the learners are intrinsically motivated. They want to do well. But it also, the important part of it is it's completely confidential. Our staff won't talk about it. We encourage the faculty not to talk about it among the faculty, what the learner did in the Sim Center. And so it's really an important part of what we do. So the last thing I want to talk about is debriefing. Debriefing is really where the learning occurs in simulation. It's amazing how you can have even a simple simulation just to provide enough context that when you get into debriefing, people want to talk. And it's really a great experience from a faculty standpoint to get in at good debriefings where there's peer-assisted learning, lots of thinking and reflecting about how to do things better. And so notice the definition of debriefing. It's very important. It's facilitated. The faculty's role is a facilitator. It's not as a teacher, okay? Similar to what we've heard before today. You want the learners to reflect, and it's experiential learning. The experiential learning hasn't ended with the simulation. It continues into the debriefing. And we had one faculty member recently that came down and said, gee, I can never get the students to talk like this in the classroom, but they talk like this in the debriefing. We actually had students there, and they said, I don't know, when we come to the Simulation Center, it's about the way the environment is, and it's understood we're going to talk. But I think we're providing the context, it's a safe environment. But in the classroom, learners sometimes are inhibited, I think. So your job as a faculty is to identify gaps and help the learners close them. So if they can do that on their own or amongst themselves with their peers, that's beautiful. Sometimes they can't, and your job is to make sure that's your teaching moment. So you pick your teaching moments carefully. So the learners reflect, and here's a real important point. As a faculty member, be curious. What was the learner thinking when they said that or did that? Because this is something that came from a faculty member who did go to an instructor's course at Stanford, and I love this. They said the most important thing you can do in simulation is to get the learners to create a mental model of their thinking, like an algorithm. When I do this, I think this, I thought this is how I'm going to approach this situation in the future. So be curious. What were they thinking? Help them construct thinking that works really well for them. Use the peer-assisted learning. No pimping. In other words, put me in my place. The students actually don't like that. And I did that a lot as a faculty member for years. We still all do that. Where we're asking a student a question, we already know the answer. They know you know the answer. And you're putting them on the spot in front of a lot of people. And that's really contrasted with the Socratic method. The Socratic method was really intended for a one-on-one kind of dialogue, not in a group where there might be embarrassment. Use good judgment. It doesn't mean be non-judgmental. Your job is to close gaps, so you have to figure those out and find a way to communicate about them. And then select your teaching moments carefully. Okay, so what we really aim for, this is lofty, but this is what we like to think about, is that in debriefing and through the simulation experience, that the learners are actually becoming more reflective, and they may carry that through into their profession, their respective professions. So that every time they do a surgery, or every time they are in the emergency department and they have a new trauma patient come in, they actually reflect on the performance of themselves and their peers, and always seeking to improve. And so that's kind of what we're trying to promote at the Simulation Center. So, thank you very much. So Dr. Vansel is not here yet. He knew he was going to have difficulty getting here, and he had some really nice discussion today about learning during clinical rounds. So hopefully he'll come and join us on the panel.
Okay, so how about a quick hand for these guys? So the next half, as they want to come up, that's right, is that the plan was to sort of form a panel of these four and Dr. Vansel as he shows up. And we want to open the floor up to your questions about how do you manage learning in this variety of different modalities, this variety of different environments. Okay, so I just get to moderate. Anybody have the first shot at this panel?
I would like to start first. It's true that lecturing is out of fashion. It seems like when you go to a lecture, you feel guilty and on the spot and kind of set up to fail. You know, you're going to fail. While I personally don't believe this, but considering the pressure that surrounds us, nobody spoke on the panel actually. How to make a lecture, a didactic lecture, better? For God's sake, this is what we do day in and day out, and this is the main modality. I do use the simulation center for our program, but we do it for small portions. So please, can you give us hints about how can you make the didactic lecture better? It's good about the lab, it's good about the simulation, it's good about everything else.
Well, I'm a course director for a course that used to be the medical biochemistry course, it's now molecules to cells, M1 medical curriculum. We make heavy use of didactic lectures still. There are a variety of ways you can make them more interactive, one of which is use of the audience response system, where you can engage the students during that time. You can also use a technique called think, pair, share, where you throw a question out to the class and ask them to pair up with their neighbor and discuss it briefly. So there are active learning things that you can stick into a lecture. The other thing is, and this is a mindset that we're kind of stuck in, is that a lecture is 50 minutes. A lecture doesn't have to be 50 minutes. We've started making increasingly use of recording lectures and providing them to the students to use at any time. And we're trying to get the faculty again out of the mindset that it has to be 15 minutes in length. It can be 15. In fact, there's data to show that a 15-minute mini recorded lecture is very effective. The other thing that we're doing to make these things more effective is we are not recording them as one long video. There is a way, and I'm happy to help anyone with this if they're interested. You can record audio files within a PowerPoint file itself so that every slide has an audio clip associated with it. We've had great success with that. The students really like it. So they can view what would be a full-length lecture, but they don't have to sit there the entire time and listen to the whole thing. If they want to go back, they just listen to that one audio clip, for example. So there are ways of doing it. The best thing to do, though, is whatever you do, keep the students engaged.
They even have a place where you can take, and if you have a 50-minute lecture, you can put it into 10-minute chunks so that people can listen to it in 10 minutes and then take a break and come back and listen to the next part. And it just, that breakup really does help them go all the way through the lecture.
But all what you're suggesting here, it's kind of taking that direct interaction between the teacher and the learner, and you're putting like the audio response system, audience response system. They're clicking, they're not talking to me. Recording, they're listening, they're not talking to me. Did it go away, this possibility to have a classroom in interact with the students and teach them something? Is it gone? Is it what you're telling me?
No, because everything that we've talked about today, there is interaction with the faculty.
But all the interactions are happening somewhere else, at the background, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but like the audience response, Think Fair Share is probably the only one. Recorded lectures, short recorded lectures, audio clips, all this is the interaction, live interaction is gone. We have no direct, like the way we are talking now,
Right.
we're learning, right?
But there's also.
Give us a lecture, 50 minutes, and we listen to you. We had ups and downs, I'm sure, all of us, our attention and concentration. But nevertheless, we were very excited, and we are discussing now, and we are learning something, correct? Is this an impossibility, practical impossibility with the new generation to have this kind of interactions?
Well, there is a problem with that. You're assuming that the students will come to the lecture. And we have a big issue with that.
But there is data, I think, that suggests that students can interact in lectures if they're there clearly, and faculty do that. It's a challenge for faculty to do that in a large lecture hall. You're in the settings that we have, our typical lecture halls across the hall here. Big room, wide, it's a long ways from the bottom of the room to the top of the room. It's very difficult to even hear from one corner to the other. So we're trying to do some things to facilitate that structurally. If you go into these rooms, they have little microphones. Those microphones were placed in to enable using projections out to other campuses. But the other very nice functionality that allows you to have is that works in that room as well. The microphones will keep track of who's in queue, who's supposed to be able to talk next, assuming people are turning them on and off, and it'll enable you to hear. So it is very feasible then to have some sort of actual interaction from one corner of a room to another in a large space. That's a very subtle difference that the technology helps with, but it's a very subtle, but it's a very way to enable you to do what you wanted to do, which is to interact. I've seen extremely skilled lecturers in huge lecture halls. I used to work with a guy at UCLA who literally would do social skills training, teach people how to do behavioral skill like assertiveness in front of 500 folks, 1,000 folks. And he would do one thing that I thought was very effective. He would model, he would demonstrate, he would lecture, he would demonstrate specifically what he's wanting to do. And then he would, like Think, Pair, Share, he would say, okay, you two, get in a group, do that. And then he would solicit feedback, broad scale, from that whole group. And that was very effective in terms of encouraging that interaction. It's the kind of learning I think you're talking about. So it can be done in large rooms. You just have to focus on it and make it happen. Other comments? I should supposed to shut up. I'm
That's good. That's good.
Go ahead.
In lecturing nationally for CME, they are required that you speak for 50 to 55 minutes at a lot of these things. And we've all seen the little tip that shows student interest, and then it wanes, that has a second peak, and then, so you all know that occurs. Any other shortcuts, when you have to speak the 50 to 55 minutes?
I think don't put a lot of words on your slides. You know, I think that there was a study that was done. It was actually a grand rounds, and they had a paper. The exact scientific paper out of the journal was on this side, and on this side was the same paper, but it was all done in pictures, and it explained it all with pictures, and it had diagrams. The diagrams and pictures, all those were gone by the end of the lecture, and hardly anybody had taken the entire article verbatim from the journal article. And so I think people don't like a lot of words. They like pictures, they like videos, they want to be engaged in that. So I think
I see the PowerPoint, what's on the slide is just a scaffolding. It's like I said, if I see a whole paragraph and read them to them, I'm falling asleep along with them. But if I just have a few high points, and then I've got 2 or 3 things to add, and then I can add a question to say, who else has experienced this, and are you willing to get back to you?
right.
But I'm talking to people from across the country now. When you all do this procedure, how many of you all use this drug? Show me with hands, and I'll say, are you willing to share with the audience? We're talking 80 to 125 people frequently, but I just think there are any other secrets.
I think keeping the presentation short is really a great thing. Many years ago, I went to the American Thoracic Society meeting. It's a huge meeting. And there wasn't I think there may have been a keynote presentation that was 45 minutes, But for 4 days, there was nothing longer than 20 minutes. And I looked at that before I went, well, that's really interesting, but it really was nice. And I know that our CE office is really doing a lot of creative things. We just had a recent conference, the iCare conference, and there wasn't a lecture over 15 minutes in the whole thing. So they pair them together and give like CE credit for the hour. They may have 3 speakers in that hour. So it really, it's a little bit of a challenge to distill it down short, but it's been my experience when we do that, it's a little bit better.
So you just wrote chunking? Yeah, can you describe chunking?
Chunking, the statistics show that really anything over 7 minutes you get diminishing return.
Right.
And that your PowerPoint slides should not be over 12 slides. And try not to have superfluous stuff on your slides that doesn't go with the verbiage.
Yeah.
And then have a transition from each chunk of material to the next.
To the next transition. Yeah, the other thing I heard is that if you have, if you have a 10-minute talk, you should never have any more than 1 slide per minute. I mean, I had too many words on mine, but I wanted to make sure people saw that, share, inquiry, mission, but I had too many words on my slides. I mean, I battle with that every time I do it. I go, too many slides. Mike's great at not putting too many words on a slide.
When I give a lecture that's 50 minutes long, when I'm assembling the lecture and I get to 35 slides, I start getting nervous.
Yeah.
I try to keep it under 40 slides.
Yeah, I do too.
And I did want to make a comment about what you were saying. I mean, you can use the audience response system for something like that. With the audience response system that we use in our course, we use it for questions during the lecture. So we ask them, we lecture for maybe 10 minutes, and then we ask them a question to apply the material that they were just lectured on. And it's not just beneficial to the students, it's beneficial to me, because it's not a lengthy clinical vignette scenario question that's going to require a lot of thought. It's a quick, did you get the concept, yes or no? There may be only 3 answer choices, but I can then determine, did the students get it? And if half the class gets the question wrong, I realize, oh, I have some remediation to do right now, and I will back up and cover that concept again. So it's a way of checking in with the students to see, are they really listening? And are they getting the concept in terms of how you're doing as a faculty member?
I'm just curious, how many of you actually use the ARS system we have here on campus? If you're teaching in the lecture halls, it's in all of them pretty much. You can use it in here. But it is available if you haven't used it. If you need assistance in doing that, you can talk to the classroom technology group. They'll be happy to show you how it works. Most of the colleges, students have access, well, everybody has access to clickers or a downloadable version on phones. We're actually encouraging the clicker version again right now. It seems to be more reliable. But that technology is available. Next question, Mom.
All the active learning sessions you are doing, you are assuming that the students have learned it on their own, either lectures, attend to the lectures, or reading, or, now Flipkart classroom, like online, video or whatever, right? So maybe I could ask Margaret the question, because I'm just in the labs, the clinical lab and the research lab. So how do you all make sure that, whatever you are expecting the students to do it in the lab, they have already learned it, and then, connect them together, How do you make them, because in your scientific lectures, the graduate program lectures, different lecturers go and give whatever they learned, right? How do you tie it together?
Well, I like to ask a lot of questions to students in the lab. Some students may not want to work with me because of that, but I think students in the laboratory need to have a certain degree of freedom to take a problem and design an experiment. But before they launch in it, especially if they're new in the lab, I like to sit down with them and say, now why did you choose to do that? And then get them to lead me back to the theory they learned in lecture. And if they can't seem to get back to that theory, then I will start asking specific questions. If they're looking at RNA levels in the cell, I'll start asking them questions about transcriptions to see if they understand. And if they really start that experiment, this is what, you really need to go back and you need to review this. Here's a paper to read, or here's a chapter to look at. You look at that, and tomorrow when you come into the lab, if you have questions, come see me before you start that experiment. That's something I do with students who are new to the lab, and the more they've been in the lab, then they know, okay, if I'm designing this experiment, I better make sure I understand what's behind that experiment, so that I can adequately design and interpret the results. But it's kind of I think a learning experience between myself and the student. How much do they know? How much do they realize that they're not just coming in and following a set of instructions? They need to be thinking about what they're doing as they do it at the bench. Because this is not like college where someone's already thought out the experiment and they've tested it and they make sure that every step is going to work right.
The active learning center is a totally new concept to me. What particular topics or style is it, do you bring to this center? And you talked about it lasting 2 to 3 hours.
Yes. Are you familiar with the concept of problem-based learning?
Yes.
Okay. This is a way of taking problem-based learning where you would have a facilitator in every small group room, moving those groups into a large group format, and I can facilitate 174 students in small groups by myself. It's not easy. I mean, it is labor intensive in terms of running around the room. But the way a team-based learning session, for example, is structured, you give them a pre-assignment. So all the new material is learned during the pre-assignment. They arrive, they take a readiness assurance test as an individual, which they get graded on. And then they take the same identical quiz again with their small group. The reason for that is the students then learn from each other. And this is not a new modality. This modality has been around for about 30 years. It was developed in the business world. It was then moved into undergraduate institutions, and it's now filtered up into medical schools. There are some medical schools where all of their education in the first 2 years is done by team-based learning, just like there's some medical schools where all their education is done by problem-based learning in the first 2 years. So after this readiness assurance session, there is a review of the quiz by the faculty member. In our course, the individual quiz and the group quiz get equal weight. So even if a student does not do very well on the individual component, then virtually on the group quiz, almost every question is gotten right because of the group dynamic. And then the students learn from each other, and then the faculty member goes over that quiz. The second component of the in-class experience is an application exercise where the students are given a problem set of really very meaty, difficult questions that require a lot of discussion. These are not questions you would use as an exam question. They could need to digest pages of lab values. For example, look at a clinical case, look at a research problem, and work together as a group to solve it. And to give you an idea of how difficult questions these are, that what I've read is that the best TBL question for the application exercise, the best design question, only half the groups will get the question right. Because you want it to be difficult enough because you then have a large group discussion. If everyone gets the question right, there's no point in discussing it. Some clinical faculty really like it because they say it's very similar to grant rounds or teaching rotations.
Do you all
It can be excuse me?
Do you have videos that would this be something appropriate for, you say, clinical?
We do not have videos. The reason why we don't have videos is because the analogy I use, it would be like videotaping a church potluck. It's complete chaos during the small group component. During the large group format, it would be like any large group discussion you would be trying to have. my best advice is to visit one of those TPL sessions.
Yeah, just go.
And you
Yes.
do it,
But in other fields like business, there are some videos that model the process.
Yes, and
So
actually,
if you
there is a very
Yeah.
good, and I can email this to folks if they want to see it. There is a very good video put out by Duke University on their TBL process, where they do show a few snippets of the TBL itself. Most of it is interviews with faculty and students who've experienced it.
so internal medicine will bring 30 or 40 students and give them a problem and go through this exercise for a couple of hours.
Well, it's mostly undergrad, first and second year.
Right.
I don't think they're doing it in clerkships, but.
No, that, actually, there are
They
some
are.
clerkships
Oh,
that are
great.
doing it. Becky Latch
Oh, yeah,
has
definitely.
done it, and I think
Yeah.
Toby
Pediatrics.
Vansel, I believe, is
Right,
used it
also
as well.
does that.
There was
Yeah,
a-
regular classrooms.
I believe Toby Vansel and Becky Latch have used it. Yeah.
But primarily the first and second year of medical school, and I think that they're doing it in.
Pharmacies also
Pharmacies
use LinkedIn
also.
strategy, and it's a popular enough strategy and a good strategy. I think one of the really important things about why the strategy is successful is that it pairs students that are having challenges with students that maybe getting it a little bit quicker. You get that peer-mediated thing going on, so it really brings up folks on the lower end much faster than some of us would do. Place read to them all day long, even though you have to do that too. So the challenge, so it's a good methodology from that standpoint. It's popular enough now that the Active Learning Center is kind of difficult to book. Some people want to use it for the wrong purpose, hence Dr. Diekman saying this is not a lecture hall. It really is not a lecture hall. It's horribly equipped for that. We're in the process, system-wide anyway, of developing a smaller space that will have the same kind of capability. So if you wanted to bring in 30 people, for example, in internal medicine, it seems at one level it's sort of a waste to put 30 people in the middle of a room that holds 200, right? Where the technology is geared to that many more students. So we know that we have a need for a comparable space with comparable capabilities for smaller groups. And we actually are in the process of doing that. It's going to be on the 8th floor of Ed 2. We're working with architects as we speak to develop a space. It looks like it's going to be able to hold, it'll be more multi-use than the Active Learning Center. The Active Learning Center is a very, very well-designed space. It works very well for what it was designed to do, but it has really one kind of purpose. It's a very hard-wired, fixed room. It's designed to have a whole lot of people in small groups, okay? And we also have a comparable need for a space that's a little more flexible. Doesn't make sense to put 30 people in the middle of a 200-person space. It's actually more difficult in some ways to even use it for a smaller group. We can't schedule it that way. So we're working on a space upstairs. The upstairs space, well, upstairs over there, will actually seat about 70 people, up to 70. So it's going to be roughly about a third of the size of the Active Learning Center right now. And it'll be set up in a way where it can actually be turned around and flipped for more of a lecture presentation kind of space as well. That's going on as we speak. I'm the first to say that will not happen and be done by tomorrow, because anytime you build something like that in a space that's next to testing facilities and things like that, you have noise considerations, and it's very difficult to actually modify anything in our buildings because of that if they're next to other active functions that we have to keep going. But we're in the process of building a place that could actually do that. Now, you could actually do that right here. This room would work for that. These tables are not the most facilitating in the world for small group discussion. They're a little bit small. They're really designed for 2 people, right? They're not a whole lot smaller than the tables in the Active Learning Center for 6, just a little bit. So there are places on campus already that could be scheduled if you wanted to try it.
Could I make an additional comment?
Yeah, please.
The comment when we implemented this, and one of the reasons why we implemented TBLs was to satisfy the LCME. I'll be blunt. Our accrediting body wanted us to be doing additional active learning. We did not have the faculty power to implement a full PBL curriculum, but we were able to implement a TBL curriculum, which is somewhat similar. The comment that we got, because we're asking the students to be prepared ahead of time, many faculty were skeptical that the students are not going to come prepared, okay? We actually found the exact opposite is going on. We went from what was expected to be a very loosey-goosey kind of curriculum where the students aren't being held accountable, that's what the perception this was going to be, into being actually a very rigid curriculum. In my course of 9 weeks, we have 11 TBL sessions which means over those 9 weeks, in addition to the exams, they're getting 11 quizzes. They have to keep up with the material. I have actually gotten the complaint from a medical student that this is awful, you're forcing me to keep up with the material. My response to that student was, mission accomplished, and I walked away. So in reality, it really benefited our students.
There are some videos in YouTube about the TBL.
Okay.
And the original TBL, the ones mostly published, was actually done in a lecture hall. standard
That's correct.
response, Not necessarily active learning.
Correct.
So there's a.
Doesn't have to be
That's
in a
more
flat
speak to
space.
what you were saying, the good lecturer, then asking, interacting with the students, 2 or 3 or whatever.
You know, it depends on the lecture hall somewhat. If you're in Ed 2 lecture halls, the old style, truly very steep, it's difficult to do discussion from one out to the next. You're really looking down on people so much, so it makes a very difficult differential in kind of the power of the 2 people talking. If you're over here in IDW, the slope is much more gentle, and we do use it in there. Some groups do lecture and TBL type activities in there, and you can do it in there. It's not as nice as being around a table, and it's probably not as good a strategy from a facility standpoint, but it can be done clearly, and the original ones were. You're right. Other questions? Yes, sir?
Yes, on the pyramid that Michael gave us, you start the foundation. The largest portion of the pyramid is knowledge. The next step is comprehension, then application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. Are you telling me, I'm asking Dr. Dickman, that you skip, the lecturing, what we do, the lectures will do pour knowledge in the empty vessel, right? We give them knowledge, we talk one kind of pouring hour, and then I give you everything, and then I give them quizzes and questions at the exam to see if they have understood what I told them, and they can apply it, and so on and so forth. So what you're telling me here, really, you remove the basis of the pyramid, basically. You don't want to lecture them.
Oh, no,
And you
not
let
at
them,
all. We
you
still
let them-
have 43 lectures in my course.
I see.
So the fundamental strategy of using lectures is alive and well. It's decreased from what it once was, right?
It
So
is
the
very
active
much
learning, in
increased.
other words, the active learning here, you're trying to make them apply, analyze, synthesize, and what have you. So this is part that the active learning we add to the whole learning experience.
Right, it's a way of applying. So one of the ways I liken it is when you're an undergraduate taking a biology class. You go to lecture in the morning, you go to laboratory in the afternoon. It's very similar to that, where you learn the material in a lecture either or on your own by reading it in the textbook, and then you go to the laboratory. In this case, you go to the ALC and work with other students working on not practice problems, but very applied problem sets. So that knowledge base is still there. The other aspect of it is that as a faculty member, while they're working on those problems and the quiz, you get feedback in terms of where their gaps in knowledge are. So you can remediate immediately. You don't have to wait for after the exam when their grade is going to be set. You have opportunities for gauging their progress and their learning that you didn't necessarily have before.
What's the difference between your method and giving them a homework that you correct? Let's say somehow electronically.
That is
You can
correct,
also
that's a
check on their
possibility.
knowledge
However,
gaps.
homework that's being done outside of class, it's not assessing them in a situation where they have to rely on the knowledge that they're walking around in their head. They could perhaps make use of materials, looking it up, etc. But you're correct, making use of homework. However, with a group of 174 students, it would not be possible to grade homework on a weekly basis from 174 students.
Computers will do it immediately. Yeah, but I'm trying to be here the devil's advocate.
Sure.
Do we have any data to support that all the active learning that we have introduced introduce are producing more, better graduate school students at their graduation and better doctors. Do we have any evidence-based?
There is good evidence to support the use of simulation education. There's a nice systematic review that was published in JAMA in 2011, and they looked at 3 levels of translational research. At the first level, knowledge, skills, and behavior, simulation fared very nicely, very robust positive impact. The second level, in terms of actual clinical skills, simulation also had very robust impact. If you do something, if a group was randomized to no simulation versus simulation, and they do it clinically, they did a much better job of doing the procedure. The third level is very hard, very distal to connect any educational endeavor to clinical outcomes. There are some studies that have done that in obstetrics and in advanced cardiac life support to demonstrate a moderate impact of simulation, which is active learning. So,
In terms of what's going on here, we don't have a lot of data yet because we haven't had a class graduate that's gone through our new active learning curriculum. However, we have seen a moderate increase in this first-time Step 1 pass rate.
Where?
It's
Here.
Here,
Right. To my knowledge, we did not see that.
Yes, we had a 5% increase last year, and
That those guys have not gone through the whole cycle. The first class that passed, that took the USMLE 1 exam, they're either equal or slightly worse. That's my last information.
the first class to go
2
through
days
the
ago.
active learning curriculum had a 5% increase in the Step 1 pass rate.
I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about the one since we scrambled everything at medical school and created the organ-based integrated curriculum, and also imposed on that was the active learning, all the active learning modalities that were introduced. And I am all for that, believe me. I wanted to understand, because this is the place where I would expect the answers. When I go to these places, I have people like myself, clinicians and educators. We have been doing this education the traditional way of our lives, professional lives, and we were asked to change everything, and we walk with the flow. We want to believe that this is the way to get better. But I thought that this is the place to ask express my doubts.
it's a very good question, and I think as a researcher, if I put my researcher hat on, I would say it's premature with our students to answer that question.
I will
Although we are showing some improvement, Dr. Diekman's certainly correct in that. The other thing is it's difficult to say what is that a function of, because in your curriculum you've actually made many modifications. You've cut down the number of lectures, you've added active learning strategies, both in the lectures, the things like clickers and all that kind of technology. You've reorganized the content into different kinds of chunks, to use that term, and you've added TBL in there as a process. So it's very difficult to tease out what's responsible for all that. It's a little premature, I think. But there is some evidence that suggests that we're moving in the right direction.
Okay,
That's
good.
not to say that all lecture is bad. That's not the point at all. This is another way to supplement that to get more learning.
We did a study it was in the early 2000s with Dr. Jeannie Hurd, and we had implemented a technique using teaching associates teaching physical